Good afternoon, and welcome to this special live stream event we're calling Storm, from Whitman's election day to ours. My name is Eric Petersons, and I'm the Education Director for the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society. In 1884, Walt Whitman witnessed the contentious campaign and close election for the seat of the White House between Grover Cleveland and James Blaine. Reflecting upon the scene of citizens casting their votes, he penned his famous poem, Election Day, November 1884. It continues to inspire today, revealing something about our individual humanity and collective identity that art somehow captures most dramatically. With our national election only 4 days away, we partnered with Vote That John and the Kelly's Writers House to explore this same energy in civic engagement through the arts, particularly with those voting for the first time. Vote That John uses the power of the youth voice and connection to bring 18-year-olds and other first-time voters to the polls, beginning in a process towards full civic engagement. Last month, Kelly Writers House hosted Part 1, which featured youth poets laureate of Philadelphia and their poetic responses to Whitman. Today, our good friend, author and playwright Laureate Carey, who directs Vote That John and teaches creative writing at the University of Pennsylvania, where she's a senior lecturer, will lead a discussion with Trapita Mason, the Poet Laureate of Philadelphia, the city's new youth Poet Laureate, Sidney Brown, and the Catalyst and Harlem Quartets, who will also perform The Still Small Voice, a new work by Kenji Bunch, who took his title from the famous line in Whitman's poem. We commissioned this work, with support from the Chamber Music America Classical Commissioning Program. Our conversation today is going to focus on how the arts challenge and inspire us as individuals and as a society, especially on America's Choosing Day, as Whitman writes. We aren't here to promote a candidate or a platform, but to highlight the power and necessity of our vote, namely the youth vote. Teachers will notice that we've created a unit study that you will find on our website, as well as Vote That John's website, that you can use with your classes, and students who are inspired to write their own poems can share them on social media with the hashtag Vote That John. Today, as you can imagine, is a virtual event, and we've worked with all the artists and poets to create a safe environment for our conversation, and you'll notice that in the description below the video are the biographies for all the participants. Finally, this evening, the Catalyst and Harlem Quartets debut on our series here at the American Philosophical Society's Benjamin Franklin Hall. I have to say, repertoire for octet is rarely an opportunity we get to hear, and we are delighted to have both ensembles share the stage. Their program includes works by Dmitri Shostakovich, Jesse Montgomery, Felix Mendelssohn, and the new work by Kenji Bunch. Join us online at 6 p.m. on our website at pcmsconcerts.org/livestream. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Laureate Carey, Trapita Mason, and Sidney Brown. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that introduction, and thank you, Philadelphia Chamber Music Society, Miles Cohen especially, for doing this work, for partnering with us and taking seriously the idea that you could put together poems and music, a great composer from across the country, in the service of talking to youth and letting youth talk to each other about voting. This election sees a great increase in youth voting. And I think our conversation has been about the reasons underneath. You hear a lot of noise on the top, but I love being part of this really substantive conversation underneath. You do have bios in the chat. I want to say also that, so I won't do a lot of biography, right? Because there can be too much chatty chat. I do want to say, though, that English classes often have the great theme where there's the individual versus the society. We like to talk about that in the West. The fact that there are poets laureate, The fact that someone such as Trapita Mason, who has published and performed, who has won awards and grants and fellowships, that person gives up 2 years of her life to the city. The fact that the Youth Poet Laureate takes this extra time on top of her schoolwork and her life to do this with us. The fact that Trapita works with the youth. This means it's not the individual versus the society. It's not the artist versus us. It is the artist, as Chinua Achebe said, the artist who helps us know how to say what we need to say. So I'm going to thank you for that. Trapita Mason is going to read Walt Whitman's poem. Sidney Brown is going to read the poem that she, as well as Youth Poets Laureate, a former Poets Laureate, wrote in response to that poem. So we're going to have Trapita first, and then Sidney next, and then I'd love to talk to you a little bit.
Thank you, Laureen. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and promoting voting and particularly youth voices and youth voting. Election Day, November 1884, Walt Whitman. If I should need to name, O Western world, your powerfulest scene and show, 'tid not be you, Niagara, nor you, ye limitless prairies, nor your huge rips of canyons, Colorado, nor you, Yosemite, nor Yellowstone, with all its spasmic geyser loops ascending to the skies, appearing and disappearing, nor Oregon's white cones, nor Huron's belt of mighty lakes, nor Mississippi stream. This seething hemisphere's humanity as now I name, the still small voice vibrating, America's choosing day. The heart of it not in the choosing, the act itself the main, the quadrennial choosing. The stretch of north and south aroused, seaboard and inland, Texas to Maine, the prairie states, Vermont, Virginia, California, the final ballot shower from east to west, the paradox and conflict, the countless snowflakes falling, a swordless conflict. Yet more than all Rome's war of old, or modern Napoleon's, the peaceful choice of all, or good, or ill humanity, welcoming the darker odds, the droughts, foams and ferment the wine. It served to purify, while the heart pants, life glows. These stormy gusts and winds waft precious ships, swelled Washington's, Jefferson's, Lincoln's sails.
Choosing Day by Sidney Brown, inspired by Election Day, November 1884 by Walt Whitman. We, the people, command the power to turn tidal waves into tsunamis, a breath into a hurricane, an issue into a movement. Americans, we can vote. I watch you tiptoe around topics. You refrain from playing the choosing game. People have trekked up mountains just to get your view, and you choose to close your eyes. How long are you gonna sit on the sidelines till the referees put Black lives on the bench, till they red flag your opinions too? We have an open shot to the goal. Choosing shows that you are present in this time and place. You are part of who gets placed at the top in this political race, who gets to be in the White House built on slavery, who gets to build back our economy. Our voices can be heard. To the highs of Washington's monument, to the lows in our history. We've protested for the right to vote. We hold the power to put people in power. We are demanding equal rights, fighting for our lives, losing loved ones, being shot down. But we still have a shot. And this choice is our voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. We were saying earlier among ourselves that because we're doing this virtually, in this beautiful hall, this is the original George Washington painting, not made up. Here we are in this place, in the American Philosophical Society, where I've been to other concerts. And we're doing it virtually. So at the end of that poem, at the end of your poem, we have silence, a little bit like worship. At the end of the music that the octet, the Harlem Quartet and the Catalyst Quartet will do, we will have quiet. I like that. I like hearing your poems, and I like having heard it a second time. You are poets. You've been a poet your whole adult life. In addition to working day jobs, you work 2 jobs every day. You work with people. You do social work and teaching and organizing and caring and sort of, I'd say, therapy and some counseling. You do school and learning. But what is it like, aside from the day job, this poetry you do, what is it like writing poetry, creating art in this moment of the pandemic, the time away from the social distancing, the no clapping, the school virtually, working with clients at a distance, what we're now calling racial reckoning, which has to do with the images that are an American snuff film ongoing, right? The constant rhetoric back and forth, the checking of facts, the statements of misstatement. What is it like writing poetry in this moment?
I think in this moment, it's urgent, it's necessary, but it's also a respite. So I'm finding the writing of poetry, all of these things are happening. There's an urgency. You want to kind of almost feel like you're a photographer, but with words, right? You want to capture this moment, all of it. And you want to capture particularly because when you look back in history, the voices that are often not captured are the ones that we live among, you know? So that's the urgency, the necessity. And then it's also, as a poet, kind of removing yourself out of this space sometimes to be able to help others be able to state and write, and for you to maybe help reframe and amplify. So that's what it's like. And then finding that peace, because without the writing, I wouldn't be able to go on with everything that you've named. It's medicine right now. You need it, you know?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's empowering to just be able to have my thoughts just spilled out into the paper, and for me to just like heal from that and know that everything's going on in the world, but I know that I can be safe with my pencil and my journal and be able to just share that with myself and then share that with others so that they can feel like other people feel that way too.
Jerry Pinkney, a native Philadelphian who's written and illustrated 160-something books, all glorious. The Mouse, Lion and the Mouse is the one most people know best. Pinkney said that when he was a boy, the only safe place for him was drawing. Drawing even in his family, he didn't feel safe. He was a dyslexic kid, there was bullying, there was the Second World War. So that little moment, I think you're talking about that place. Let me also ask you, I heard, and this is not, I heard the poems differently this time because of your reading. I want to ask you, Sydney, what did you take from Whitman? What did you throw back? What did you not take from Whitman? I mean, I hear you talking about hurricane and tsunami. I hear the poem talking about Lake Huron and the water and the geysers and so you did landscape, you did the word choosing, you used some of the word. What did you take, but what did you leave out?
Yeah, so I
Or fight
definitely,
with?
I definitely took like all of his descriptions and of how great everything was, but then I also like held back on just like that time period and like how things have changed and how now like we're seeing more things more and we're having to just reflect on that in our own work and we're responding to his time period, but it's like now things are changing and we have to react to that.
Did you feel a connection? Certainly his time period, I look at it and I see Jim Crow. I see abuse of Chinese immigrants on the West Coast. I see an enormous amount of political corruption during the end of the Gilded Age. I see deals and tricks. So it's not like that was okay. It was okay, and now, or that was bad, and now we're. Did you feel different? Do you feel differently about the 19th century, having done this back and forth with it, or no? Or you already felt it?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's just I feel like he didn't really acknowledge it. I feel like he wasn't really talking about it, and now it's like having responding to it. It's like this is what's happening. You have to acknowledge everything else because yes, like there are these great monuments and everything, but there's so much history behind them, and they have so much meaning that you're not really talking about.
I see. But Tripita, when you were reading Nor Good or Ill or The Dross, how did that feel? Did you feel like he was minimizing the dross?
Yeah, I kept thinking like Sydney. I mean, Sydney's poem beautifully caught all of the things I felt Whitman was missing, because the more, I had to really, get with Whitman, And I had to read this a couple of times and really kept reflecting on all of those who are really not, or missing. But then, the thing too is balance, right? Because in this very complex place where we are, particularly around these complicated times, you also have to stop and look at the beauty. So I focused on the landscapes, and I think you kind of referenced some of that in your poem, Sydney. But I was balancing between acknowledging the good that's there, but really fighting and pushing for exposing the other things that are not there and should be there and aren't mentioned. So that's how I was able to kind of reckon with this poem and understand it from that perspective.
There are many students who are involved with Vote That John who are climate activists and are looking at climate justice. And I heard this poem in that lens too. It's another thing that we're talking about, right? And as we think about the fires and the hurricanes and all. Yeah. The still small voice. When we were making titles for these programs, Kenji Bunch, our brilliant composer, chose Still Small Voice. Over on the other side of the world, of the country, we chose, and both of these are in the poem, we chose Storm. Do you feel, were you touched by that still small voice line as poets?
Very much so. It reminded me, I thought about Sister Sonia Sanchez. She has a poem called This Is Not a Small Voice. So when I heard still small voice, there's the word still, right? Quiet, still, but also the lessening is still small. But it's vibrating and there's power in that. So my reflection on that is the smallest voices in a chorus are loud, right? The smallest voices, there's no small action or small voice. But I understand that it's also about marginalized voices, marginalized people, but there's also power in that. There's power in those voices when they come together, especially, and they won't be pushed away or pushed back.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I think definitely when this pandemic started, it was like everything just got quiet and no one was really talking about it. And then people started talking more, and then it was just that one still small voice in that movement just ignited a flame, and everyone started like, this is what's going on in the world, and this is what we're talking about, and everyone had to deal with that still small voice. So I think it just takes that one person to just ignite that flame, and then everyone starts talking about it.
And I think Whitman certainly was making, there's a biblical reference as well. And I think that idea that there is somewhere that we're listening to, a small voice, would also talk to the way that someone's speech brings our attention, focuses our attention to that voice. Certainly poetry does. Yeah, poetry does that. I think that we want to move our conversation toward Kenji Bunch, who is our composer. We're going to talk, or rather he is going to talk. We've asked him some questions similar to these. These are questions that have to do about being an American, about the still small voice as well. But also, we asked Kenji Bunch, who, it's a funny word, attended. He was in Seattle at the time, but he did tune into your reading with the other poets, your reading at Kelly Writer's House. All of this, by the way, there is a wonderful curriculum guide for any teachers who want to think about this some more, study it, go to their classrooms. That reading, those poems are on our websites, as well as guides for teachers, discussion guides, and prompts so that other young people can also write poetry in response to this, to the music, to the poem. But Kenji said at that event, and he has said again, that he was very affected by your poetry, by the young people, by it wasn't irreverence, but it was clear engagement of that poet. One of the things we have in that curriculum is a wonderful African American reviewer who talks about African Americans' engagement with Whitman, the ways in which he was liberating, the ways in which he was of his time and not liberating. Fascinating. So we'd love Kenji Bunch to talk to us about some of those subjects. Being American, his response to the youth poets is still small voice. And we'd like to sort of hear some of that from him. And then I think we'll be queued up to hear the amazing music that he has done as well. Thank you.
Hello, this is Kenji Bunch coming to you from my home in Portland, Oregon. I desperately wish I could be there in Philadelphia with all of you, but I can assure you Philly is in my heart and my thoughts for a number of reasons. Of course, I'm so honored to be included in this event. I want to thank the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society, the Catalyst and Harlem Quartets, the American Philosophical Society, the Kelly Writer's House, Vote That John, Laureate Carey in particular, for including me in this. It's really a great honor. I also need to mention the family of Walter Wallace Jr. are in my thoughts, and the community in general as you grieve and hopefully can heal from his tragic loss. So to answer the question about citizenship and what American music is, I learned a lot from listening to the young poet laureates. I learned about, and I would say my approach to the poem, even though I was already well into the thick of writing the piece, my approach And my attitude shifted a bit after listening to their words. I had originally approached it with a reverence, as if it was something possibly sacred that I wasn't allowed to touch with my own hands, look but don't touch. And what I realized is it's a living art in which I can mold and reshape it into something new. And I think maybe that is an American attitude, that we can take history as part of a continuum and continue to rethink and remold things into something that resonates more with us, that suits our needs today. So to me, for some reason, it made perfect sense to find a vocabulary for for my music to go with this poetry that came out of the Black American experience. The music I'm writing for this is influenced mostly by the language of the blues and its kind of development into R&B and specifically the Motown sound. So I think you'll hear some of that in this work. As far as the words, the still small voice, I have to confess I was unaware of the biblical reference, but I find that fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense. I felt that the way Whitman used that term in the poetry was to really offer this stark contrast. He described in such grandiose language the natural monuments and wonders of our country in a way that kind of reduces us to these very small beings on the scale of the mountains and seas and everything around us. And yet it's the still small voice that offers us our true power. That's our agency to affect change. Now, of course, at the time Whitman wrote those words, the still small voice was not available to all voices, right? Everyone who should have been able to vote wasn't able to at that point. But taking that text and applying it to today, it still has a relevance, because we often, I think, can feel our small, insignificant opinion, our thoughts aren't going to make a difference, aren't going to matter. But it's exactly that difference that each of us has this obligation to contribute our voice, our still small voice, to the effort of voting in order for differences to be made, for change to happen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Bravi, bravi. I'm here texting Kenji, actually, at the moment, telling him how extraordinary this was. I'd like to ask you some content questions and moment, but right now I'd just like to ask you some questions about interpreting new music, right? Because not everybody does it. I'm listening to your timing. I'm thinking about the fact that you are working together as an octet, but in fact you're two quartets, right? You don't live together in a pod in a little apartment in Brooklyn just playing together all the time, right? You had to get this together. What is it about doing new music? How do you, what's hard about it? How do you figure out, I know you count the notes, but there's a lot of syncopation, you've done this first interpretation of this new music. Did you talk to him? Do you argue with each other? How many times? Just asking.
I think, well, I will say that one really wonderful thing about chamber music and the sort of like this world that we all grew up in, this classical music world, for the 8 of us, we've actually all known each other in different ways, in different places, for a very, very, very long time. So I think in that way, the relationship we have, these two quartets, Harlem Quartet and Catalyst Quartet, makes this collaboration both special and in a way like easy, because we share a long history of friendship and musical experiences. So I think that first of all, makes coming to a new piece like this, at least from a starting point, a little bit better. I always like to approach, and I'll let my colleagues kind of chime in on this too, new music sort of with, you know, an open mind as to that anything is possible. And I think the first thing I think we all do is kind of get a sense for who the composer is, what kind of music they write, what's the purpose of the piece, and then kind of study what everybody else has. And that's sort of where we start. Do we argue? I mean, I think all quartets argue. If you're not arguing a little bit, then maybe it's not, you're not really working out your ideas. But this has been a really wonderful process for us.
Would you
Sure.
be specific when you say we all argue? That's like couples saying, of course couples argue, but my husband and I argue differently from the way somebody else argues, which is different from, like, what is that like?
Sure. Well, it's a true joy to get to premiere a new work, and it's really a treat to get to be in touch with the composer. So we have been in touch with Kenji. We had some questions about like the snapping. Some people have a loud snap, a soft snap. And so one of the discussions was how we would rectify the snapping so it always would have some sort of consistency. And, you know, we felt that beat together. So that was one thing. And then I think that it's not exactly an argument, but people feel strongly about making the piece the best iteration it can be and truly telling a story and hopefully getting the audience involved in the vibe that we feel and that we're trying to create. And so sometimes it'll be an idea of, you know, who's going to show this beat or who's going to take this line and we'll follow them. But also just being sure to listen out, look up since we're half masked, and to continue to communicate even during the performance. It's just always happening.
Anybody else willing to tell us what you needed to figure out? That's maybe a better way than saying arguing. Was there anything else you needed to figure out that didn't jump off the page at you?
Well, I think one of the most intriguing things about working on a brand new piece that has never been played before, you know, when you sit down and you play something like the Mendelssohn Octet, there are years of tradition behind that piece, years of references, Perhaps you heard it when you were a young kid and you always, reflect back to that first experience of listening to it. Mendelssohn has a very well established tradition of language in the performance of his music, and that's all stuff that as musicians, as professional musicians, we're all familiar with. With performing a brand new piece, not only do you have to familiarize yourself with the piece, but I think Carla touched a little bit on this, you have to familiarize yourself with that particular composer's language, and there isn't always as rich of a tradition of that composer's language, so establishing that is really a fun journey.
That was exactly though I was going to say.
That's good, that's good. I must say that when Kenji talked to us and told us that he was, calling on African American musical traditions, and you started to snap, my question was, am I allowed to snap too? Is this part of the, is it call and response? Or is it why? It was, yeah, but I thought this was a first time, and I should chill out and not mess it up.
That's not written in actually, but that makes 150 million %, yeah. Yes. You should write that in. Kenji, if you're listening.
Tell us something, a question that we ask the poets. Tell us something about making music in this moment in America. Actually, I want to do something. I didn't. There are 8 of you here, right? There are 8 of you here. I'm not going to breathe on anybody. This is number 9. I'm number 9, right? All of us here have either a claim on African American, people of color, Latinx. We're here with this original picture of George Washington. There were, I want people to think about, suppose there were pictures of the 9 people George Washington had enslaved in the White House that's just a few blocks from here. The music that Kenji Bunch wrote, the traditions, the chords, what you decide to go sharp and flat, the snapping, the words that Sidney Brown said that had an influence on Kenji Bunch. All of that is happening here in this structure that has a picture of that man, but not a picture of the 9 people he enslaved here in the Philadelphia White House. I couldn't help but think that as I watched the 8 of you playing that gorgeous music. So that's how it feels to me doing work in this moment. You've made yourselves ready in a lot of ways. Is there anything different about playing your music now from playing it 5 or 10 years ago? And it hasn't been that long, I can tell you. You're talking about a long, long time? I could tell you about a long, long time. Is it different?
I think even more recently than 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I think that it's always different. And if you're really in touch with your communities, if you're really in touch with yourself and how you relate to your community and the people around you and how you affect change in that way, that confluence of energy, it's always different. And it always has to be different. And it always has to be an evolution. Otherwise, you're being stagnant and making a point for what? Just for yourself, and it becomes irrelevant.
Well, now I think that some of us have been championing works of living composers, specifically minority composers, and specifically with jazz traditions in the music. And I almost feel that the rest of the country and the overall culture is catching up with what we believe for a long while, which is that all music has a rightful place, and all music represents a tradition, a legacy, and it should be presented as equal. Like for the longest time, I experienced personally that jazz tunes were reserved for an encore, as the dessert, as the lighter work, as opposed to the main dish, which is the wonderful, main course, usually standard European piece. And don't get me wrong, we all here in this stage practically worship the old masters, because there is a reason why they transcend history, and we believe they're completely universal. They do not speak about like the German sentiment or the Austrian or the French sentiment. They speak about the human condition. So the grand pieces are absolutely universal and transcend all sorts of barriers. However, presenting new works made by people that look of the majority of the big cities in America only reinforces the idea of bringing in new audiences that feel more identified with what we do. And it brings a new, fresh attitude towards who is our audience, what are we trying to do, just being a museum piece, or a force for perhaps changing awareness. So in our way, I think we are activists, because we champion works that needs to be championed, and we place it in the same context as we replace the old masters.
This is beautiful. Now, they told me to talk right into this mic. I want to make sure that you get every word, because it was wonderful.
Noriko is the best.
Good. So we don't have to make you say it again, right? It's fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. We're going to now invite Trapita Mason, our Philadelphia poet. Before you go, our Philadelphia Poet Laureate, she's going to come back. And she has done something extraordinary. She has made what she's calling a collage poem from the poems of the former Youth Poets Laureate. And she's going to read that. What we're going to do is, rather than have a stop and a finish after that, we would love to make those words the end of this wonderful program. I'd like to thank all of you again. You know, Linda Reichert, who ran for many years the New Works group here in this area, she always talked about how what we want with a new work is to hear it and then talk about it, and then you want to hear it again. I feel like that. It's not my show, and I'm not trying to ask that, but I feel like I'm going to go back to the YouTube and listen to this again, because there are so many things I still have to learn from it. And I'm going to ask, a lot of people listening to probably do that as well. This last piece from Trapita Mason will include these various works. We're going to thank the American Philosophical Society. I don't know if they're going to put up those pictures of those 9, but no. And we'd like also very much to thank Kenji Bunch, the Harlem Quartet, the Catalyst Quartet. I want to thank the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society for doing this work. And Trapita Mason, our Philadelphia Poet Laureate. Please come forward.
Thank you, Lorene. What a pleasure to come after such beautiful music. This is a poem collage. These poems that were submitted commissioned by former Youth Poet Laureate, and they include the works of Siduri Beckham, Mia Concepcion, David Jones, and Wes Matthews. Collage poem. This voice that sings glory at day's end, dear and tender, tempered with passion for generations, is far from still or silent. When everything returns to dust, it will belong to the harmony of the masses. When I leave this world, there will still be everything I stood for. I will fight for America, not a private version to keep close to my heart. I will fight for a deeply public America. I will fight for America. We'll remember the power and the privilege of the polls. We'll know how many lives have been on the line to secure this right. We'll see the value in the ink filled, the button pressed, the screen tapped, the ballot mail. We'll see the fight that lies behind that very action. Elect. Election has many definitions. Elect as a verb, it means to choose someone. As a noun, it means simply the chosen. Voting can either be an action or a being. Who are you waiting for? Don't simply cast a ballot, cast a seed and water it. To vote is to choose, is to stand, is to speak.